Before it was a race, Marathon was a town, and between those two, it was a battle. The Battle of Marathon. It took place in 490 BC during the first Persian invasion of Greece. Why were the Persians invading Greece? Well, they were probably going to eventually anyway, but the more immediate reason was because the Greeks helping out the Ionians. And who are these Ionians, you ask? Well, ain't you just a barrel full of questions? You see, there was this thing from 499 to 493 called the Ionian Revolt. Basically, there had been a grouping of cities called the Ionian League that had been conquered by the Persians, and eventually they got tired of the Persians and revolted. Pretty simple, right? Well, several Greek city-states, including Athens and Eretria, sent aid. Athens because they were already technically at war with Persia, which has a whole political thing behind it that I'm not going to go into. I'll just say that they were technically at war with Persia. Eretria sent aid because they relied on trade in the region and Persia was kind of cramping their style. And after the revolt was put down, the Persians were pissed, especially their leader Darius I, who looked at Greece and proclaimed, "I'ma get them some bitches." And so he set about building an invasion force in order to get them said some bitches. And so the Persians sailed off and attacked several islands, then captured and burned Eretria, and the only some bitches left was Athens. They landed in the Bay of Marathon, which as you can guess was near the town and plain of Marathon. By the way, Marathon is Greek for fennel, and the area was named as such because it was a field full of fennel. Yeah, say that with 5 times fast. So the Persians were landing and the Athenians are heading their way. Marathon was 26.2 miles from Athens, and that will be important later on. A runner was sent from Athens to Sparta. This also will become important later on. But he arrived during the Carnea festival, and so the Spartans would come help, but not until the next full moon, so Athens had about 10 days to kill. And unlike Jason, they didn't take him in Manhattan. The Athenians arrived at Marathon and set up positions to block the Persians from moving off the plain. Now let's talk some numbers here. The estimates vary, but we're looking at 9,000 to 10,000 Athenians versus at least 25,000 Persian infantry plus 1,000 cavalry and at least 100,000 reserves. But these reserves were basically armed sailors and they were more meant to defend the ships more than anything else. By all accounts, the Athenian strategy was to keep a stalemate until the Spartan army arrived, which would greatly bolster their numbers, but again, that was at least 10 days away. Yet, interestingly enough, the Athenians caught sight of an army marching in their direction. This was 1,000 hoplites from the city of Plateau, who was an old ally of Athens, and even though Athens didn't even send for their aid, they sent their entire army out to help. Just a really cool move. They were good people. For 5 days, supposedly, give or take, the two sides waited and then the Athenians attacked. The reasoning for them attacking before the Spartans arrived seems to have to do with the Persian cavalry leaving. This took away a Persian advantage, but more importantly, it was the reason the cavalry left that mattered. See, the Persians understood that a battle was going to eventually happen, but they also knew that if the Athenian army was here, then they weren't in Athens. And the point here wasn't to defeat the Athenian army in battle, it was to topple Athens. Thusly, a number of troops were being loaded up to sail directly to Athens while the rest of the force kept their army in place. The Athenians figured this out and knew they had 2 options. Option A, desert the battlefield, head to Athens and defend the city by land and sea, or B, fight the Persians at Marathon, win, then haul ass back to Athens before the Persian fleet could arrive. Okay, so you know when you're watching a football game and there's only 2 minutes left and one of the team's up by 40, so pretty much at this point you know that you're either going to see a team get a blowout or you're about to witness the greatest 2 minutes in the history of football. Well folks, this was the greatest 2 minutes in football history scenario. They chose option B for badass and attacked, not just moving their troops forward, but full on charging, mostly to avoid the arrows and spears once they got in their range. The Athenians had stretched their front line out to match the width of the Persians, and though the Persians made advances in the center, their flanks fell to the Greeks, who then turned to the center and the Persians began to retreat. And the Greeks followed and ended up taking or destroying several ships. Once the Persians had been driven from the battlefield and back to the sea, the Greeks left a small detachment to hold the battlefield and then commenced to haul ass. Now, there's a story that they had sent a messenger ahead of them, supposedly a guy named Philippides or Phidippides or whatever, and he ran the 26.2 miles to Athens proclaiming their victory. Victory! And then he died. This may or may not have been the same messenger sent to Sparta. It's up for debate, but by the account of Herodotus, who's pretty much the main guy that wrote things down during the Greco-Persian Wars, this runner to Athens didn't happen. And it was actually a Robert Browning poem that brought the story of this runner to prominence. Instead, you had the Athenian army in full armor, gear, and weapons running the 26.2 miles to Athens after fighting a hand-to-hand battle in order to beat the Persian fleet. And the thing of it is, they did it. That's running a real marathon. The Persians, failing to gain a landing due to the Greeks' arrival, just turned around and went home. Don't worry, they'd be back, though it would be about 10 years and Darius' son Xerxes would be in charge. Oh, and the Spartans showed up a few days later after marching 140 miles in 3 days, so not too shabby. And to tie back around to Phidippides or Philippides or whatever, his run from Athens to Sparta, about 152 miles, is reenacted once a year along the same route he took. It's known as a Spartathalon, and the runners have 36 hours to complete the 152-mile cross-country run. The record is 20 hours and 25 minutes to run 152 miles. That's 245 kilometers, by the way. Big ups to them folks. Big ups to them.